My name is Eric July, and I'm the founder and owner of Rippaverse Publishing, which has already produced 2 multi-million-dollar comic book campaigns. I realize that there are a million videos and write-ups about how to draw and write comics, but there are hardly any that give you insight on the business side. This video, I guess in some way, will be the first of its kind, and it will be full of harsh reality, so be prepared. Many won't like what I have to say, but do understand that I say all of this because I want the industry to thrive. You cannot find solutions to problems without first admitting that they exist. The crux of what we'll be addressing in this video and series is making money in comics. I'm not speaking to those that treat it like a passion project only and think it's normal to be dirt poor. I'm also not speaking to those that are just doing this part-time with another job subsidizing. We're talking about making a living in comics. Right now, 2 very key things are happening right now in comic books. For starters, people are beginning to finally admit the economic problems that plague this industry. Creatives are broke and are complaining about pay, from legends to newbies, and it doesn't matter if you're working with an indie or the big dogs. You're getting paid very little or you're getting paid very late, or both. The other thing is that people are also realizing there's alternatives now. Crowdfunding, for example, has decentralized the means. That's great, but in some ways it's a problem. People that are in over their heads and have no business bone in their body are trying to be publishers and they have no idea what they're doing. This has caused extremely late campaigns and unfulfilled promises. Worse, some now have access to more money than they've ever seen in their lives, and they end up spending it on everything else but the project. That's unfortunate because now many customers are weary of the crowdfunding aspect. Comics are operating on an old, broken, and archaic model. Unfortunately, some people offer input on things they're completely ignorant on, which brings me to my first point. Stop listening to your favorite comic book creatives when it comes to business. 99% of them are not publishers, nor are they businessmen. They've been contractors their entire lives, and the only thing most of them know is the system that currently exists. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but taking their advice on anything outside of the creative stuff is a bonehead decision. This is why so many people are protective of that old, broken, archaic model that the Marvels of the world, DCs, and other major publishers use. It's because it's all that they know, but they are big companies at the end of the day, and they can at least get them gigs, the creatives that is. They're tied to mega corporations, so they can operate at a loss, and it comes with some level of familiarity. A pivot from this old model, as broken as it may be, it will benefit the creatives, but it also comes with its share of uncertainty, and some would rather protect the people abusing them than go out into the wild. So if you want to work in comics, you need to make yourself useful. Not everybody is meant to be the head honcho or a business owner. There's nothing wrong with being a creative and only that. If you don't understand business, you need to get with people that do. I happen to be both a creative and a businessman, but most people in art and entertainment are one or the other. Everybody can benefit from at least somewhat understanding how much things cost and being able to put that into perspective. Another thing I want to highlight is this. Nobody owes you money. Get that through your skull. Every artist thinks that they should be getting more regardless of the circumstances. You are paid for the demand of the job it is that you're filling, not for your personal wants, desires, or lifestyle. This communistic, socialistic line of thinking has people believing that just because they work, they're owed something. That's not how this works. The market will determine your value. If you produce something that people don't want, you don't get paid. So grumbling about how hard you work is only as relevant as the demand you're meeting. Some creatives in comics need to be humbled. Likes on social media have tricked them into believing that people actually are interested in buying their products. So when I saw that hashtag comic books broke me and would see folks going on about how much they work and how much they did or the awards they either won or were nominated for, I trip out because nobody is really addressing whether or not people were buying that product that they created. Accolades and pats on the back from your peers are irrelevant and they need to be humbled too. Hell, most of them are as broke as you are. Making money in comics means creating for an audience of buyers. It ain't a charity and you need to start treating it that way. All right. Let's talk numbers and what it takes to make a comic. This is an unpopular opinion, but it's the truth. Many customers have been spoiled on the pricing of comics. Now, inflation aside, considering how much they cost to create, if you're competing with the corporate model, there's no way that y'all are going to make money unless you're pushing an insane amount of units. So you shouldn't even use that model. When the price of comics went up, of course, the customers are going to complain. I complain. Nobody likes to spend more money than they had previously. My point, however, is that it was always a nonsensical price and a nonsensical economic model. Retailers and customers may complain about the price of comics, but the real complaint is with the actual quality. That's what the readers care about, and good quality comics generally are the ones that, let's say, a retailer can sell. But if the quality was high, nobody would be griping about paying whatever the price is. $5 for a 20-some page book. Doesn't matter. If it was of quality and they were being able to push those units and sell it, nobody would be griping. People blow $5 on spilt liquor and candy, but I don't fault those customers because it's not like the companies are giving them insight on how much things cost, and they're often getting a bad product. Of course, you're going to complain about something being of a price when it sucks. But the creatives that talk about that price, they're really short-sighted, especially when they talk about growing an audience of youngsters, and they always speak about how cheap it needs to be. I don't know if you've looked at how much they're spending, these youngsters that is, on video games, but it's way more than $5, and that's not even enough for a microtransaction for a skin that they'll get bored of after a couple of hours. People need to remember that despite all of the reach that mainstream comics has, it has only been lucrative for pockets of people. There's a reason why it has constantly transferred ownership, and in the case of like a Marvel, it wasn't that long ago that they faced bankruptcy. You have things like the Hero Initiative now where legends are broke as a joke. The reality is this: even at its peak, comics had a poor economic model. People are foolish to try to use its familiar structure as if it's exemplary and needs to be replicated. But this is extremely important and why you shouldn't just mimic people for the sake of doing it. If you are like us, your comics are your primary product. It's what you eat off of. Others, though, definitely the big dogs, treat it like it's a loss leader because they have several other branches and revenue streams, and that's how they can make money. It's a way to, let's say, get the word out for some companies, and they go into it expecting to lose money. You can't do that. Some point to things like manga being cheaper while completely ignoring that it's mostly uncolored, printed on cheaper paper, and the dimensions are smaller. But they also have their own economic problems with people that work on those mangas, and we often hear about how bad the work conditions are, and even some of them aren't getting paid. The price becomes a problem when the quality lacks. That's what this boils down to. But especially as an independent, you can't possibly compete with the mainstream and either manga or American comics in these certain vital economic aspects. You don't sell at their volume. You don't print at their volume. You're not connected to some multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar corporate entity. You're playing by a completely different set of rules, and you shouldn't go broke trying to mimic their model. In all honesty, there shouldn't even be a unified price point, but we'll get to that a little later. The bigger publishers, though, don't have actual readers as their main customers, and that's something you need to consider. The retailers and distributors are their main primary customer. For them, it's like publisher to distributor and distributor to the retailer. So the cover price isn't even what the publisher is getting for that physical copy of that comic. They may get a third of that when you consider the other fees that are involved in all the middle folk. But let's continue. I believe working examples are the best form of insight. This is the part where many of you will learn. People on Kickstarters and Indiegogo right now, they're doing these crowdfunders and they vary in price. Some are selling like 40 to a little over 50-page books for like $25. For the sake of this example, let's say a book is selling for $25 for 50 pages. So what all goes into making a comic? Well, the bulk of the work and the people that get paid the most will be the artist, the writer, and the colorist. The one way to save money and make this profitable is if you combine some of those. But most times, the artist, writer, and colorist are different people. Even the artist sometimes is split between a penciler and inker. So I'm going to give you some rates for people that generally do this full time and are actually somewhat comfortable off of it. This isn't necessarily the rates of my guys, but I'll let you know what's competitive. A penciler and inker, assuming they're the same guy, will get paid the most out of everybody on the project. A competitive page rate for a professional artist that does this full time is going to be about, let's say, $300 a page. 3 to 5 pages a week is generally enough for them to feel like they aren't doing a rush job and are tied up with only that project. Assuming it's a 5-page a week work rate that they're at, if they worked nonstop, they'd be making 78 grand a year, of course, going project to project. Now that's a decent living in most parts of the US and abroad. Obviously, the best artists will command more than that. But keeping it at $300 a page, if they drew on all 50 pages, the employer is in the hole $15,000 so far. At peak efficiency, it'll take them 10 weeks to finish this 50-page project. Moving on to the colorist, who will make the second most. A competitive rate is going to be a little over $100, at least $100 minimum, and that's generous. These guys can normally do far more than 5 pages of interior work a week, but obviously they're going to go for your project only as quick as the line art can get to them. This means a 50-page book would be $5,000 or so. Next up is the writer. For most, it's less, and others it's more, but a competitive rate for a writer will float around $100 a page. Of course, writers can pump out scripts in no time, but for this 50-page project, they're making what, like $5,000 or so, some comparable to what the colorist is making. Last is the letterer, and they're going to get about 25 or so bucks a page competitively, and that's $1,250 for this 50-page book. So for all the heavy lifters of a comic, you're going to spend at least $26,250 for this 50-page comic. This does not include editing or pre-press. In the independent space, the writer or artist is usually the one that is heading this crowdfund or independent project. Now, basic math tells you that if that person is the artist that's doing that project, they're going to be saving a lot more money than, let's say, a writer that's heading the project. So a writer will be in the hole $21,250 if he didn't pay himself, and an artist will be in the hole $11,250. But let's not assume that any of these guys are not paying themselves a competitive rate. Let's assume they're paying themselves and you're still at that $26,250. Their commission is just a part of that. If you open up any book though, right now you'll be reading off like 12 names, even more in some cases, which will include like 3 editors, the editor-in-chief, the publisher, and producers. Keep in mind that I haven't even mentioned any sort of bonus structure either. So there could be more to that $26,000. You see where I'm getting at? There's a lot of folks trying to eat off of one comic book, and there isn't enough money to go around. Many of these are the fake jobs that I mentioned, but for sure, you're gonna need editors, you're gonna need pre-press. Those are legitimate jobs. And let's just say, for the sake of conversation, that you only pay $1,000 between those guys for that 50-page project. Let's add a decent cover artist, $500 a page, $125 for colors. We're at right under $28,000, so let's just round it up to compensate for the other miscellaneous jobs. 28 grand for a 50-page comic book if everybody got paid decently and competitive. That's only the beginning of the cost though, and this is where most people realize that they're in over their heads and trying to do this independently. The work truly starts when you're trying to get that book to the customers. Let's discuss printing, since physical copies dominate this industry, not digital. The pre-order or crowdfunding model allows you to gauge the numbers of prints you're going to need. Let's say you sell 1,500 copies, and let's just say you had one cover, you got it stapled, it's on 60-pound paper stock, which isn't really that good, but it is the industry standard. And you had no print deal. You're gonna be spending between, let's say, $1 and $2 per book once you account for shipping it to yourself or whoever's gonna be doing this fulfillment. And it ain't gonna be that good of a print job either. Of course, the more you print, the less per unit you're gonna pay, but let's be realistic here. If I'm being as friendly as I possibly can be, let's just say you spent $3,000 to get them all printed. Now you're at $31,000 accounted for this 50-page book that you're trying to release. If you sold all 1,500 copies, you've made $6,500 in profit. That's what the math say. Wrong. It's not even close. The cheapest route would be to handle your own shipping, but so many people aren't built for that. You're gonna use a 3PL, you're gonna use a fulfillment center, you're gonna have some sort of setup where you're paying someone else to do the work for you. Assuming that you're bagging and boarding each comic, which you should, you're going to have to pay for those as well. It's supplies, never mind the boxes that are gonna be associated with the shipment. So if you use a 3PL, you're gonna be charged for that package that they're sending. You're gonna be charged for the labor to put that board in that bag and that book into that bag. You're gonna be charged if there's storage fees. You're gonna be charged. They're gonna consider it a part of the cost. If, let's say, you have multiple different items and they have to pick those. This is why anybody that says, well, you'll just save money using a 3PL, they are full of crap. Generous estimate is gonna be $3 per order if you include all those other random fees if you're using a 3PL. This basically puts selling 1,500 copies directly to customers and using someone else to handle the fulfillment at maybe breaking even. If you consider the other supplies, whoever though is operating this project will have lost money if everybody, including themselves, got paid competitively. And the people that are on sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, they're having to pay 5% platform fees. They're having to pay 3% processing fees for each transaction. So at least $2,000 of that is already gone, and you haven't even charged anything for shipping. And I haven't even mentioned Uncle Sam, because boy, he got to get his cut too. Basically a $37,500 campaign on, let's say, an Indiegogo that sold only one cover of one book could very well be in the hole. It's either that or they're getting paid below the competitive professional standard. And that makes sense for some people. Maybe you're trying to fill out the market. Maybe you're trying to get your foot in the door. You're trying to see what the actual gauge is. I can empathize with that and I understand it, because then you're like, it's worth taking that loss. And maybe it's just a side gig too, but somebody ain't getting paid. Even when you look at a campaign that sells double of what, let's say, a $37,500 campaign gets you for a 50-page book, they're probably still losing money, or somebody isn't getting paid. That's because they're selling all sorts of merchandise, and that merchandise isn't even gonna have that same profit margin of that comic, which is already pretty thin, and they're probably doing multiple covers, and multiple covers mean higher price per unit, and so forth and so forth. Even if you're printing on crappy baking paper, you might be rocking a nail. There just ain't a whole lot of money to go around unless you're independent and doing all of the writing and artwork yourself. It's not as much of a problem if you're pushing tens of thousands of units, but let's be realistic, most people aren't gonna do that. Again, somebody is simply not getting paid their professional rate from a lot of stuff that has eyes. This industry is in a bubble that's bound to burst. Comic pros are finding out that they don't have the draw that they think they do, nor are they ready for an industry that isn't propped up by mega corporations. So how in the hell do you actually make money? Well, first you gotta figure out your usefulness and become the best version of that. Are you a writer? Are you an artist? Are you a businessman? Pick your lane and either build a team to cover your deficiencies or join a team where you're needed. But you gotta make yourself useful. Comics is very much a team sport, but you can have the greatest group of guys, at least you think, and nothing matters if you don't have customers. That's the humility hump that many artists are too arrogant to get over. They think of themselves as rock stars and believe that the entire market goes to their beat. That's just not the reality. Nobody cares how professionally trained you are or whatever pros co-sign your work. Is there an actual demand for it? If there isn't, you'll be eating your cat's food in no time. You'll just be a broke person with maybe some accolades. But getting back to the business part, I want to be clear, I'm not anti-3PL or fulfillment or distribution. Definitely if you're selling to retailers as your primary customers, but good luck on that. You just need to understand everything comes with a catch. It comes with a price. If you're completely out of your wit, it makes sense to have someone else handle your fulfillment. That's what a 3PL sells. Basically, they will handle all the unfun stuff. You just have to create the product and get it to them. But they're a business simply profiting off of their service. So if you handle it yourself, understand you're basically running two major businesses for your operation: creative and fulfillment. It's a lot of work and you have to be business savvy. You'll be constantly having negotiations with vendors and suppliers, from shipping companies to printers, and it'll never stop. It'll only increase the more successful that you get. It'll be up to you to decide if it's worth the headache. For me, it was. We are as independent as anybody in this industry. We host our own store, which means no platform fee and minimal processing fees. Our primary customers are readers, and we handle our own distribution. And we price our comics in a way to make sure that our professional creatives are paid properly and our employees are taken care of, and we can profit so we can do more things. As an independent, you must realize you're playing a different game than those mainstream cats. Your benefit is having the direct line of sight with your audience because they're your main customers. You can also pivot on a dime, which brings me to my final point. Know your customer. In a day and age where creatives have made it clear where they stand, they're going so far as to treating their audience with contempt. Where's your advantage? Gone are the days of creatives that had the mystique to them. You didn't know much about your favorites unless it was buried in a magazine interview. Now everything is so accessible, everything's online. The creatives are volunteering their opinions on social media. Now, the customers are paying more attention because they got burned in the past to where their money's going. Some people are under the impression that they can just create and people will just gravitate towards their projects, and for the most part, that's not how it works. There's still going to be marketing involved at the bare minimum. You're going to need a face, and people like genuine people. To me, that's your advantage, keeping it independent. That's if you're playing your cards right. Now, some look at the fact that I had an audience prior to launching the Rippaverse as if it's something I just stumbled across. It was something that I spent almost 20 years building, and having an audience isn't enough anyway. That's people with massive followings that aren't selling millions of dollars worth of product. You've got to create something that has a demand. You're in the wrong industry if you think that you can just dictate what people will find good or not. Though this is one of the most obvious points, this is arguably the most challenging for some creatives due to their egos. Your target audience should not be your peers unless you're just doing this as a hobby. Another thing that you'll learn as soon as you start seeing success, though, is everybody's got an opinion, and everybody and their mama will insist that you're doing it the wrong way. But the old saying is, those that can do. So I'll repeat for a second time, 99% of the people in this industry have been creative contractors their entire lives. Somebody has always assumed a risk on their behalf. In other words, most of them have no clue what it takes to run a business. I'll say it again, I want this industry to thrive, but it's gonna take some acceptance of those harsh realities and a complete overhaul. Consider this part 1 of the How to Make Money in Comics series. This was just a general overview. Next, we'll isolate each main point that I made in this video and some others that I didn't, but it'll be at greater lengths and far more detail. See you soon. Don't forget to check out my comic book company over at Rippaverse.com. After 2 multi-million-dollar campaigns, you can still get ISOM #1 and #2. Up next this fall is Alpha Core #1, written by one of the most prolific writers of all time, Chuck Dixon, and penciled by Joe Bennett. And if you can't wait for new content, go to our website right now and pre-order the first official Rippaverse hoodie. Y'all be easy.